Good afternoon, everybody. Yesterday we have seen aerobic respirations in organisms, in which in presence of oxygen at optimum temperature the sugar gets converted into carbon dioxide, water, and a large amount of energy is produced during this process. Today we are going to see second type of respiration, and that is nothing but anaerobic respiration. The name itself suggests anaerobic, that means without air, that means without the presence of oxygen, or it may be in lack of oxygen. In some organisms, in absence of oxygen, the incomplete breakdown of glucose takes place and the energy is generated. That is called as anaerobic respiration. So what happens in this process? As I have told you, glycolysis is going to remain the same in anaerobic respiration as well. So here in cytoplasm, the glucose molecules, which are 6 carbon compounds, gets converted into pyruvate and plus a little amount of energy is generated. So this process is called as glycolysis, which is going to remain one and the same. But after this, when the pyruvate enters in the mitochondria and there is no oxygen available, that time what happens? The pyruvate undergoes incomplete oxidation. As no oxygen is available, it goes incomplete oxidation or incomplete breakdown, and as the incomplete breakdown is there, because of that the other substances are formed, like substances like ethanol in some cases, or like lactic acid in some cases are formed with the amount, a very little amount of ATP molecules. This reaction is completed. So this is how in anaerobic respiration incomplete breakdown of glucose takes place. As it is incomplete, not all the molecules of glucose get converted into carbon dioxide and water molecules. So instead of that, other substances are formed, and that other substances are nothing but ethanol and lactic acid. And that's why there are two different types of anaerobic respiration. Anaerobic respiration is also called as fermentation. It is given the second name as fermentation, and that's why it is called as, these two types are called as, first is alcohol fermentation, as ethanol is produced. Ethanol is nothing but ethyl alcohol. Its commercial name is ethanol and its chemical name is ethyl alcohol. So as the alcohol is produced as the end product, that's why this process is called as alcohol fermentation. So in alcohol fermentation, incomplete breakdown of glucose takes place in absence of oxygen in the mitochondria of yeast cells. This process is observed in the yeast cells, and then the production of, from pyruvate, the production of ethanol plus carbon dioxide and plus 2 ATP molecules are formed. So 2 ethanol molecules, 2 carbon dioxide molecules, and only 2 ATP molecules are formed. So see the difference between ATP molecules formed. In aerobic respiration, 38 ATP molecules are formed, and now here in anaerobic respiration only 2 ATP molecules are formed. So such a less amount of energy is produced in anaerobic respiration. And this alcohol fermentation is specially observed in yeast cells, and that's why it is used in the process of brewing. Brewing is nothing but fermentation again, like formation of wines, formation of beer, formation of cheese. During this this processes, yeast cells are used, and these yeast cells are they break down the glucose into ethanol, carbon dioxide and ATP molecules, and these ATP molecules are used by the cells of yeast for growing purpose. And this is how actually the process of alcohol fermentation takes place. So this is one type of anaerobic respiration. The second type of anaerobic respiration is called as lactic acid fermentation. In lactic acid fermentation, so as you know, the end product is lactic acid here. Carbon dioxide is not produced during this process. Only lactic acid and energy is generated by the breakdown or incomplete breakdown of pyruvate. So here what happens? The pyruvate which enters in the mitochondria gets converted into lactic acid and energy, that are ATP molecules. Only 2 ATP molecules are generated here. So in lactic acid fermentation, there is no absence of oxygen, there is lack of oxygen. Okay, some bacteria, what they do when there is very little amount of oxygen is available, that time they bring about the conversion of pyruvate into lactic acid and ATP molecules, and this is observed even in human muscle cells. Most of the times when we do vigorous exercise, that time we observe cramps in our legs, and that cramps are because of accumulation of this lactic acid which is produced in human muscle cells. So what happens when the human, they do the vigorous exercise, that time the availability of oxygen is less and the demand of oxygen is more in the muscle cells. As they are working very fast, the availability of oxygen doesn't meet with the demand of the oxygen, and that's why whatever oxygen is available, with that the pyruvate is incompletely broken down into lactic acid, and this lactic acid get accumulated in the muscle cells, and that's why the players or the athletes, they observe cramp after they do the vigorous exercise. So human muscle cells perform this lactic acid fermentation in lack of oxygen. So there are 3 different ways by which the respiration takes place. First, in presence of oxygen, carbon dioxide is produced, water molecules are produced, and 38 ATP molecules are produced, which is performed by all the cells in the human body, especially the aerobic organisms. Then second type is no oxygen, anaerobic. In anaerobic respiration, again, what happens when there is absence of oxygen, no oxygen at all, then these yeast cells, especially, they perform alcohol fermentation, where the pyruvate get converted into ethanol plus carbon dioxide plus 2 ATP molecules. Then in human muscle cells, where there is lack of oxygen, very little oxygen is available, that time pyruvate gets converted into lactic acid and 2 ATP molecules. So this is how anaerobic respiration takes place in the organisms. I hope you understood both aerobic as well as anaerobic respiration. In the notes, I have given the difference between aerobic and anaerobic respiration. Please go through that. Now, after this, we are going to learn the respiration in plants. Very simple topic to learn about, that is respiration in plants. So what happens in plants? There is no particular respiratory system as such in plants. As we have particular respiratory system. We have nose, we have trachea, we have the windpipe, we have the lungs, alveoli for the purpose of respiration. But in plants, there is no such particular respiratory system available in their body. So they have to perform their own respiration, and that's why stems, leaves, roots, they perform their own respiration. So we will see one by one. First, respiration in roots. So what happens in roots? When these roots are present in the soil, in between these soil particles, air gaps are there, and the root hairs which are there in the soil, by the diffusion process, the oxygen is taken in the root hairs and the carbon dioxide is given out by the root hairs. In the root hairs which are near to the air, which are exactly adjacent to the air particle, to the air present in the soil particle, so they perform the diffusion process and enter in the root hair. From root hair, it enters in the stem xylem. The oxygen enters in the stem xylem and then perform the process of respiration. In the root xylem also, it performs the respiration process. So this is how in roots the respiration takes place, that the oxygen diffuses into the root hairs, and then the cells of roots use this oxygen for the purpose of respiration. Then we will see in stems how stems perform the respiration. Stems are of two types, woody stems and herbaceous. These two types of stems are there. In woody stems, as they are quite tough, there are little openings present onto them, and these openings in woody stems are called as lenticels. And these lenticels, through these lenticels, by the process of diffusion, oxygen enters in the stem and carbon dioxide goes out of the stems. So this is how stems perform the process of respiration. Especially woody stems perform the process of respiration, as they have the lenticels, small openings present on their cell wall. Then after that, the herbaceous, they are green in color and very soft. So they are having presence of stomata on their outer side. In herbaceous, they have presence of stomata on their outer side, and through the stomata, oxygen is enter inside the stem and carbon dioxide is given out of the stem by the process of diffusion again. So all the plants, roots, stems, leaves, all the plants, they perform the process of respiration with the help of diffusion process. Then in leaves, as we know it very well that stomata are there. These stomata take in carbon dioxide and give out oxygen, but they perform the vice versa process also, that they give out carbon dioxide and take in oxygen during night time. So this is speciality in plants, that during daytime they perform photosynthesis and during night time they perform respiration. So during daytime they produce the starch, the glucose, and during night time with the help of that glucose they produce the energy. So these two mechanisms are seen in the plants. One is called as light phase mechanism, where in that during that light phase mechanism plants absorb sunlight and prepare the starch with the help of photosynthesis, and during night time when sunlight is not available, that time this produced starch is oxidized for getting energy out of it. So this is the dark phase mechanism, light phase mechanism and dark phase mechanism. In dark phase mechanism, plants produce their energy. And this is how respiration in plants takes place through roots, stems and leaves. So here we end with the respiration in plants. So in today's session, we have seen anaerobic respiration, that is incomplete breakdown of glucose in absence of oxygen, in presence of certain enzymes and at optimum temperature. Then we have seen the types of anaerobic respiration. Two types are there. Alcohol fermentation, that is when the total absence of oxygen is there, no oxygen is available, pyruvate is broken down into ethanol, carbon dioxide and 2 ATP molecules. This is called as alcohol fermentation, which is seen only in yeast cells and in some bacteria which are present deep in the earth's crust or high in the mountain levels. In such bacteria, the alcohol fermentation is observed. Then we have seen lactic acid fermentation, especially in human muscle cells and certain bacteria which to which very little oxygen is available. In such organisms, lactic acid fermentation is seen, where pyruvate get converted into lactic acid and 2 ATP molecules. Then we have seen respiration in plants. We have seen respiration in roots, respiration in stems and respiration in leaves through the process of diffusion. So I hope you understood today's session and I'll conclude my today's session. Thank you.